Hey everybody, it is Pastor Siri. I'm a Lutheran pastor and a spiritual seeker, and this summer I am doing a series on the curriculum of love, which is a 15-lesson curriculum I wrote on how to learn to love God, yourself, and your neighbor more thoroughly. So today we are talking about the very end of the loving God portion, which is about trust and surrender to God. Ooh, what does that mean? So take a listen. So I'm going to be very honest, is that the idea of surrendering to God can be terrifying, and a lot of us have resistance to it. First of all, because God is often described in ways that are awful. I'm going to just be honest. Like, so much of the narrative we've inherited about God as being this jealous, vindictive, male, punitive, controlling, is like everything that's a red flag. Like, if that wasn't a human being, you would run far away from that person. And so when you talk about surrendering or submitting, there's that language of control, of losing, of your dreams, your hopes, everything about that not being important, not being valued. And you're basically just going along with someone's agenda like a slave. That narrative can be found in certain strains of a lot of different religions. But I'm going to just argue that everything about that is wrong, because that's not who God is. If God really was that controlling, we would see that. We would know. In fact, I think people's biggest criticism about God is actually the opposite. God is so non-controlling that a lot of awful stuff happens on earth. Isn't that interesting? Like, people actually want God to be more controlling. They're like, why do bad things happen on earth? Do something about it. And so we almost get this picture of like, we want God to be the one who's like punishing the bad people. But at the same time, we want the right to do what we want to do, right? We want to live our own life. We want to explore things. We want the freedoms to make mistakes. So it's all just very interesting when we start talking about who God is and how God has a relationship with us. It gets very dicey. But I'm talking about this because my understanding of trust and surrender with God is a completely different perspective. First, the character of God is one we do not have to be afraid of at all. Yes, if we encountered God, there'd be so much awe and mystery. We'd be like, oh my gosh. But in general, as a human being, God is not someone we have to fear. God is not coming after us. God is not waiting to punish us. It's just not the kind of God that people experience, that I've personally experienced. Experience is incredibly important, my friends. You have every right in your life, your own spiritual authority, to start to claim the narrative from the external people who first introduced you to God and religion. And you, as you get older, start to claim that spiritual authority within yourself by your own practice, thinking, feeling, and experience. You take that on yourself. So you start to figure out, what do I believe? You start to ask the questions. You start to deconstruct the faith that was handed to you by external people and to start to figure out what happens within you. This is what any mature spiritual person does, is they take what was given to them in childhood and they take the good and they leave the bad. And they also start to construct it in a more meaty, 3D substantial way through their own experience, their own lived experience. Not just a mental construct, not ideas and thoughts that stay up here. What have you experienced? So it is in that context that I talk about trust and surrender to God, because everyone that I've ever talked to that has had actual genuine experience of the divine finds definitely a being you can trust, one who loves unconditionally, who gives so much freedom for us to make mistakes and is like, it's okay, like figure it out, it's okay, I'm waiting for you, it's okay, you have time. So in that context, of a loving God who's giving us so much grace to play around and make mistakes and not judging us for it, what does surrender mean? We're going to go a little bit into this when we start talking about loving ourselves. But basically, when I think we talk about surrender, it's like, what is the control that we have? What are we holding on to so tightly that's actually getting in our way? So there's this conversation and these concepts of like ego or false self that is different from our true self, our true core self. Again, we're going to talk much more about this in the next video. But in this regard, what the ego's job is to protect us. It's to keep us safe. And so it's going to hold on to beliefs and behaviors and thoughts and actions that it thinks is keeping us safe and tries to control other people and ourselves in ways that aren't necessarily wise and can actually be very sabotaging, very painful. Not that we're trying to do that, we just don't know another way. So if you think about the wisdom and the love of God, which can also be connected to our higher self, our true self, our child of God self, and then you think about this unwise ego that's trying to control everything. Okay, so God's not controlling because God's not ego-based. You have all of these like, I'm going to do it my way, I'm going to do it my way. And of course you're allowed to. Do it your way until it doesn't work out. Do it your way until you've hit rock bottom and you've exhausted every other option. And then maybe we can start working on the good stuff together. So surrender is actively practicing that idea of like, okay, maybe I'm forcing, maybe I'm controlling, maybe I'm holding on to, maybe I'm causing a level of suffering because I'm trying so hard to make it my way. And what would it be like if I released control? If I released control of trying to make everything go my way, of trying to make that person act, think, feel the way I demand them. What if I release control? What if I release the need to be perfect? What if I release my fears? My fear that if it doesn't turn out this way, that I'll be unworthy, I'll be rejected, I'll be criticized, I won't be loved. What if I release fear, control, power, all of these things that are sabotaging me and my dreams and my relationships and my life? And what if when I surrender the need to control that, I'm opening myself up to a partnership with one who is wise, with one who does have my best interest in mind, with one who wants to be the fullness of who I can be without those fears. So if so much of how we're driven in this world is driven by fear, then yes, the actions and the thoughts and the beliefs and the way we're going to operate in life is not going to be from the highest and best interest of us and anybody. Fear is a very low, basic vibration, you could say. When we're afraid, everything goes black and white. Everything gets very dualistic. It's fight, it's flight, it's this, it's that. Enemy, friend, you literally lose all the creativity of your brain when you're in fear. And if the more we are in fear, the more we're in a offensive, defensive, protective state. And that is not going to allow us to be creative and collaborative and courageous and calm and compassionate. That stuff just goes away. So surrendering is in a lot of ways starting to recognize the ways in which we're self-sabotaging and getting in our own way, not in a judgmental. This isn't about judging ourselves. We have to stop judging ourselves for being this way. It is perfectly normal, and every other person is caught in this too. But when we can actually recognize it and go, maybe there's another way to live. Maybe there's a way to exist on this planet where our gifts, our talents, our deepest desires and expressions and wishes and beautiful, beautiful things that we have to bring to this world can be expressed in the most beautiful way when fear isn't in the way, and control and domination and power and all this other stuff that we're convinced we have to do in order to be okay. If we release that, this amazing flow and movement of God's going to come through us. What if that's what surrender is? It is actually a partnership with the divine, that the fullest and most beautiful, powerful expression of who God made us to be can finally flourish. That basically we've been hiding under a bushel. You know, this little light of mine, we've been hiding it under a bushel of fear and control because we are terrified we'll be hurt otherwise. But the wisdom is that actually when we do shine our light, when we do partner with God, it might not be easy, but amazing things can happen. It might not be easy because sometimes the path we're led down asks us again to confront those fears. So to say the hard thing, to do the hard thing in the face of resistance, because certainly we're going to meet people still operating out of their own fear, control, and power issues. And so when we speak truth, when we shine our light, we will have criticism. We will have, people who will jump on us, so to speak. But the more and more we find within ourselves our own power center, the less we're likely to give our power away to other people, the less we're likely to be hurt by other people. And it's a slow process. It takes a while, but it's possible. That's what I love, is I love every single story, especially in the Gospel of John, where Jesus does not seem to care what other people think. Repeatedly, in his own ways, it's like, but he didn't give himself over to them because he knew they weren't wise enough to actually know who he was in the first place. I love that. Whether people put Jesus on a pedestal or whether they thought he was demonic or anything in between, Jesus is like, they don't get it. They don't get it. So why am I going to do any of my actions based off of how they perceive me when they don't perceive me correctly? So he just did his thing and let the chips fall where they lay. So in the same way, for us, surrendering, trusting that God has our back, surrendering is entering into this flow of co-creation between God and our highest self. And it is letting the fears and the barriers and the things that get in the way of that slowly loosen. And this is an ongoing thing. I don't think it's very common for people to have a singular act of surrender that then changes their entire life and they're surrendered the rest of their life. Like, if that happens, amazing. Maybe that's what the Buddha experienced. Maybe there were people who had that. But my guess is it was a continual surrendering. And actually, I think we see this in Jesus. I think when he was in the desert for 40 days, there was a massive purging and surrendering of his need to control, his need to be the best, his need to be all those ego stuff. Bleh, gone. But every time he aligned himself with God, went up on the mountain to pray, over and over again, I think we see examples where Jesus had to do that again, had to surrender again. In the garden, he's like, not your will, but my will be done. It was a surrendering. It was like, okay, I'm not going to let my fear get in the way of what's going to happen. Because of course he was afraid, he was terrified, but he wasn't going to let that get in the way. Fear is real. All of that's real for us, but we don't necessarily have to let it get in the way. We can see what's underneath that, and we can continue to move through it for the best expression. I'm just going to leave you with an example. So to me, if you think of children, okay, you think of children, how diverse they are. They're filled with so many different, growing concepts of the world, growing concepts of who they are. Now, you have some people who would believe that in order to make children in the way they want them to be, so this is about control, that what they have to do is put them all in a classroom and force them to sit a certain way, to be conformed a certain way. They're going to teach them to learn a certain way. And if they don't, they're going to be punished. So maybe you've personally experienced something like this, or maybe in movies or books. I mean, this was definitely part of the school system that the United States had, right? That there was this idea of conformity, of forcing people to be in a certain way to produce a certain kind of citizenship. This is a pattern of control and uniformity, and it doesn't matter who you are or what your gifts are. You have to conform to that, and you might be separated out in how you have to conform based on gender, based on race, There's a hierarchy, there's a stratification, and you have to be shoved into that box, okay? This is not wise. This is not of God. This is a very immature understanding of the world, and it is deeply harmful. It causes a lot of suffering because for people who say we're left-handed and we're forced to write with their right hand and that hurt them, that's just one example of many ways. People who are neurodivergent, people who had ADHD, without the accommodations and the understanding of how we're different, people could not learn, and they had traumatic experiences in school because of it. So if you think that God is like a schoolmaster in a school like that, yeah, that's pretty terrifying. And churches have often been, in some ways, duplicating that kind of an environment. You must conform, you must think, act, and behave in a certain way, and anything that's different is wrong. Let's go to another model. There are other models in which you have a deeper understanding of how everybody's different, right? The teacher understands, cares about each student, sees them as unique, has the time, the energy, and the patience, which we don't actually allow public teachers very much to have in our current culture, to have the time, the energy, the patience to devote to each child uniquely as they are. That teacher goes, this kid needs to move around. This kid likes a lot of structure. This kid likes quiet. This kid likes this. And is able to meet that student exactly for who they are and sees their unique gifts and allows them to flourish. Oh, you're an artist. Oh, you're an engineer. Oh, you're a caretaker. Oh, you are, right? Doesn't see these differing personalities and gifts as being a challenge to them personally because there's no ego that they have about it. They're there to help that child flourish and to find the ways in which they can be their best self in a respectful, compassionate, exploratory, curious environment. If you take the same kids and you cram them into this one model, some of them are going to do okay, some of them will thrive, and some of them will be deeply wounded. You put them in this other environment, and you're going to have probably more of 100% flourishment. In my perspective, that is how God is that God understands how different we are, our gifts, and intentionally made us that way because there's so much that has to be done on the planet. There's so much that has to be done on the planet. And when we have adopted and taken in the shame, the guilt, the fear, and the judgment of a world that tries to cram us into these boxes, we've let our light be diminished. And that's so sad because really, God wants to guide us through personally so that who we are and what we came to do in this world can be done fully, with joy, with collaboration, with excitement. And that is a much better picture of the world. Imagine a world filled of people who weren't filled with fear all the time, competitiveness, a sense of hierarchy, these shoulds and have-tos that put so much shame, fear, and guilt on us. Instead, that we were excited for what we were doing in the world. We were excited about what other people were doing in the world, and we were championing each other, and we were learning how to collaborate and work together in a way that was like flowing and synergistically. So the first thing we do is we allow God to flow with us and synergize with us. And we trust that who we are in our fullness and our weirdness and everything is who God made us to be. And that God has our back. And that God wants to work with that fullest and most deepest expression of who we are. And once we've started to embody that, and other people start to embody that, then we can start to play with each other. And it's so exciting to see how different this world could be in that kind of a vibe. So for now, just like one situation at a time, one person at a time, one roadblock at a time, one sense of fear and control at a time, we surrender and be like, okay, I don't want that anymore. I don't want to feel this way anymore. I don't want to act this way anymore. I don't know what to do about this. Please You help me, work through me, teach me, guide me, show me. Let's flow together in this new way of being. That is my understanding of trust and surrender with the living and loving creative force of God. Okay, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to have a conversation with you, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.